Jeff Bezos once said, "The older I get, the more I realize how many kinds of smart there are. There are a lot of kinds of smart. There are a lot of kinds of stupid, too." And so joining us today in studio is Morgan Housel with the Collaborative Fund. A few weeks back, you were here to talk about different kinds of smart, and now we're going to cover different ways of being stupid that you, too, can avoid.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe not.
Maybe
some people can't avoid it.
Well, let's try.
Okay.
Acknowledging them is the first step to avoiding them.
Right.
So the first one is intelligence creep. Not knowing the boundaries of what you're good at and assuming talent in one area signals skill in all others.
So there's actually studies on this that signal out doctors, studies that of doctors, that doctors tend to make very poor investors. And I think it's
totally going to say doctors.
I think it's hard to actually pinpoint like the cause of this, but what makes a lot of sense is that doctors who are very smart in one field, they're very talented. By becoming doctors, they've great standardized test scores. They're very intelligent, and they assume that intelligence should transfer over to their investing abilities, and so they tend to take much more risk with their investing. They have much more confidence or overconfidence with their investing abilities that leads to poor returns. And I think it's one of these things that's so hard for people to wrap their heads around because people who fall for this bias are very smart and very successful, and it's hard to tell them like that doesn't mean that you're also good at something else.
Hurts your ego, man.
And a doctor would never assume that because they're a smart doctor, they're also like a good plumber or electrician, or maybe there's some, but there's like, that's obvious that the skill shouldn't transfer. But I think for whatever reason, investing is this idea of like, oh, I'm a smart person, so I understand the economy, I understand how markets work, even though it's such a completely different skill. And I think a lot of it is a lot of skills that people are very intelligent about are hard sciences. Medicine or physics or biology or something where there's a right answer for questions. Whereas investing is just so nuanced and it's governed by behavior that's messy and has there's an exception to every rule. And I think that trips a lot of people up. I think another category beyond doctors are engineers. Because engineers have a precise answer for everything down to the 10th decimal point. And investing, that's not how it works. Investing is about the odds of success and room for error and being okay with being wrong, 60% of the time, but still doing okay, which is just a very different dynamic than what exists in engineering, where there's a precise answer for everything.
Right. I also think of doctors as being very comfortable with large amounts of debt at a young age because of student loans.
Because they have to. And
then they also have a lot of money to make mistakes with. They're higher earners, so
right.
so rather than the trope that doctors are really bad aerospace engineers,
right.
we get investing.
Right.
So, next one.
Thankfully, they're not building airplanes, though.
Right?
If they thought they were good aerospace engineers.
All right, number 2, underestimating the complexity of how past successes were gained in a way that makes you overestimate their repeatability. Is this about luck?
I think that's way about that. I could have just written luck. But I rambled on for a while. I think this is especially true in investing where you during one bull market, you do really well. And therefore you assume like, hey, here's what I did during this bull market. And therefore I'm going to do it again. I'm just going to take what I did last time and do it again without realizing that markets evolve over time. And what worked during one period of time might not work during the next period of time. This is especially true if you just look at something simple like growth versus value investing. You go through these 10 or even 20-year periods where growth investing does really well, which is the past 15 years. Mm-hmm. But before that, there was a period where growth did terrible and value did really well. So unless you're willing to have a flexible mindset and understand that what led to success in one era might not be repeatable in the next, you get these people that get really tripped up and frustrated. Mm-hmm. So if you go back to 2007, value investing was all the rage. And over the previous 10 or 15 years, value investors had smoked everyone else. And this is when the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting started getting really popular because everyone wanted to be a value investing. And a lot of these value investors since 2007, over the past 12 years, the returns are terrible because value investing has just been so difficult over the past 12 years. And what's worked is growth investing, Facebook, Amazon, Google, and whatnot. And a lot of these value investors, if you speak to them, I think are either in some state of denial or they're just really confused and frustrated that they were so successful before and then it just at the flip of a switch, that success stopped.
When I started at The Motley Fool, there were kind of camps where it
Yes.
was like Bill Mann and Joe Mager, they're value investors. Throw Mike Olson on the pile too.
Yep.
And then there was like David Gardner and they're the growth investors. And I think if you talk to Joe Mager now, he's going to be like, yeah, I'm no longer like this hardcore value
But
guy.
see, that's the personality that you want. You want someone who is able to change their mind when it's necessary. The people who are like, I'm a value investor and I'm never going to change my mind, or a growth investor, never change my mind. Those are the people that end up having trouble.
Yeah, I wish I could give Joe my money, but he's over in Australia.
Well, you can move to Australia.
Can I?
Sure. You have my permission.
Thank you. All right, next one. Discounting the views of people who aren't as credentialed as you are, underestimating the special knowledge they have since they've experienced a world you haven't.
This is especially true, I think, in finance, where at the upper echelons of finance, you get into investment banking and private equity. If you didn't go to an Ivy League school and if you didn't intern at Goldman Sachs, you're not worth speaking to. That's like only a slight exaggeration. And the flaw in that, of course, is that they just get so insular in their views because they're only talking to people who went to the same schools as them, who were taught by the same bankers at the same bank through the same summer program as them. And they're missing the views of a lot of how the rest of the world works. People who didn't go to Harvard, who didn't go to Goldman Sachs, but have experienced a really important part of how the economy works. Whether, they're from a different part of the economy, they've seen they've experienced different industries. And the views of those people in aggregate are way more powerful and more influential than the group of views of like the tiny insular group that went to Goldman Sachs and Harvard. And I think where this is probably most relevant is in politics, where after the 2016 election, a big part of the country realized that there's another part of the country that they had never really was aware of.
And they're a little angry.
That thinks very differently about the world than they did.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, for a lot of voters after 2016, that was just a shock because they had only spoken to people by and large who were of the same general, they went to the same schools as them. They worked in the same companies as them.
And we all agree. Isn't that great? Therefore, the whole country agrees with us.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But I think that also exists in investing as well.
Yeah. So Tom Gardner spoke in front of a group of people at the Fool this last week from Leadership Greater Washington. It's this group that David's involved in. And Tom's advice to everyone there, and it's a group of a wide age range of people in D.C. Who are, it's a leadership Greater Washington, leadership group. I'm butchering what it is that they actually do. But anyway, networking, growing your skills, connecting, that kind of thing. And his advice to this group of people, who are all accomplished in their own way, is that they need to get a mentor that's younger than them.
Yeah, I think that's great.
That they need to find someone who can explain what the future is. Because when you're older, you just get so locked down into your world and what you know. You forget that what you know is actually dying out with you.
100%. My 3-year-old son, this is no exaggeration, is more adept at using an iPad than my parents. No, not even an exaggeration. And I think when you and I, Allison, are in our 60s, it's going to be the same thing.
Yeah.
There's going to be things that 30-year-olds, 20-year-olds understand that we just will not be able to wrap our heads around. So as the world evolves, like to be able to understand the views of someone who's seen a different world than you, who's grown up with different values than you, is really important.
Yeah. I feel weird about still having, like, going up to a Gen, what's younger than millennials? Gen Y or something right now, are we calling them?
Gen Z.
Gen Z, thank you. Gen Z. Wouldn't you feel weird just going up to someone and being like, can you explain how the Snapchats work?
I've done that at work. We have some Gen Z at our office,
done it
and
too.
I've asked some tech questions.
It's embarrassing.
It is embarrassing.
You just got to suck it up, I guess. All right, next one.
Can you tell me how the Google works?
What is the Google? Yeah. All right, next one. Not understanding that in the classroom, the game is you versus the test. But in the real world, it's you versus coworkers, employees, customers, regulators, etc., all of whom need to be persuaded by more than having the right answer.
So it's like if you're taking a test in school, as long as you calculate the right answer, you win.
Don't care how you got there.
All you need to know.
Yeah.
And if you're a jerk, if you can't communicate with people, doesn't matter. You calculate the right answer, you're good. But in the real world, once you get into once you start working at companies, it's not the case whatsoever. And if you are very talented at your skill, you're a great engineer, you're a great coder, whatever, but you're a jerk, you can't work with people, you can't communicate with people, you can't persuade people, it's not going to work. And I feel like this happens a lot. Most of us have probably seen someone who was an absolute straight A student at a great school, just off the charts intelligent, and they kind of flounder in their careers because it's a very different skill that you need in the workplace than is tested in school. But so much of our view of like what is intelligence, it's your grades at school. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't necessarily translate to how well you're going to do in the real world because there's so many other skills that you need to that you need to know.
Yeah. There's a saying, the confused mind says no. And the idea of like, if you want to convince someone of something that you have the right answer, you got to bring them on the journey, because if you just present them with it and they're at all confused, their first answer is going to be no. I'd be interested to hear, as you've gone on in your career, maybe what's one of the things you've learned for helping convince people. How do you do it? How do you communicate?
Well, I think for a lot of things, it's just your ability to tell a story that people can wrap their heads around. And even if you have the right answer, let's say you're solving an engineering problem and you know the answer. The answer is 2 + 2 = 4. But you can't just give people that equation and expect them to come along with you. You need to tell them a story about how you got there, why it's important, why this is going to make a difference, and explain it to them in a way that is compelling to them, that is short enough that you're going to capture their attention. You're not just going to ramble on with a 50-page PowerPoint. I think the power of storytelling is more important than almost any of the other skills that we think about that are taught in school, because a lot of those skills like math and science and whatnot aren't effective unless you can tell a persuasive story around them. So that's I think if there's a skill that should be taught to a greater degree in schools, it's probably storytelling, which is this really soft, like when you say that, people probably think like kindergarten, like telling stories. What is that? But all these other things that we learn aren't that effective unless you can tell an effective story around them. And a lot of the best writers of all time are people who in their fields, if they're mathematicians or historians, are not the greatest, but they were very good storytellers. And because of that, they went to the top of the heap. My favorite example is Bill Bryson, who among historians, he's kind of a pop historian, let's say. And if you like within historian circles, he's not looked upon that highly. If you're a hardcore historian from Harvard or Stanford or whatever,
it's like, I didn't see you in the library.
It's like Bill Bryson is not really a historian, but he's such a good writer, such an amazing storyteller that he's sold millions and millions of books. And I think that's a perfect example. Another example is the book *Sapiens*. The author's name I always have a hard time saying. Yuval Noah Harari. I'm probably butchering that, but I think that's it. His book *Sapiens* did not break any new ground about biology or evolution. Everything that's written in the book was already known. But he did such an amazing job telling the story that the book sold 8 million copies. So I think if you are a phenomenal biologist, or you work and you're a tenured professor at Harvard studying evolutionary biology, you probably look at that and say, this guy hasn't discovered anything, but he's the most popular. And the reason is because he's such a good storyteller. So storytelling is one of those things that, like, unless you master that, all the other important skills don't really matter.
Yeah, right. All right, and the final one, closed system thinking. Underestimating the external consequences of your decisions in a hyper-connected world, or dismissing how quickly those consequences can backfire on you.
I think, like we were talking earlier about, a lot of what goes on in investing is related to politics, particularly the triggers of recessions and bear markets and whatnot. So if you are an investor who says, I'm not into politics, like I'm just an investor, I don't pay attention to politics, I think that's fine. And it's fine if you're just willing to put up with recessions and bear markets, which is a great attitude. But the fact is that politics plays a big role in investing. So if you're just looking at investing through the lens of finance, there's all these other forces that have a big impact on it. And if you're ignoring that, then you're probably going to have an experience that is vastly different from what you expect. And this is also true, again, if you're an engineer and you just think about a problem through engineering, but to succeed at your company, you also need to be adept at your company's politics, your internal politics, like how to move up, how to persuade people, all these other forces that play a big role, even if you get trapped within your own field and ignoring everything else that makes a difference, it's hard to move ahead. It's a special kind of stupid.
It's special. And then you closed your article with Bernie Madoff summarized this idea a year before his scheme unraveled. So
Bernie Madoff, about a year before his quote unquote hedge fund fell to the ground, did an interview, and this is on video. You can look it up on YouTube. And he said, this is not verbatim, I don't remember what it was exactly, but it's pretty close to this. He said, investors don't understand that you cannot get away with fraud anymore. The SEC is too good at what they do, and if you are a fraudster, you will get caught.
Crazy.
And it's just like, wow, that's Bernie Madoff saying that. And there's so many different takeaways from that.
Yeah.
Like, did he know he was going to get caught? Did he think he was the exception to the rule? There's all these different ways to think about it. But that's a really special form of stupid.
Morgan, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And listeners, you can get more Morgan at collaborativefund.com. He writes for their blog there. And you can also follow him on Twitter at Morgan Housel, at MorganHousel.
Thanks for having me.
Come back again.